The senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I thank the floor and appreciate the chance to talk about the amendment before us and several of the other amendments. These amendments generally are intended to change our military policies, our presence in Iraq, and essentially to begin in one way or the other a politically staged withdrawal from Iraq. We're concerned about and support the troops. You know what I hear from the troops? And I've been there, and I've talked to them, I've heard from them at home. The one thing they say is, we're over here risking our lives. We're fighting a mission which we believe is succeeding, and we're making progress. And the last thing we want is Congress to declare a military end or take over the management of the war from our commanders. Time after time, they've told me, we've made too many contributions and sacrifices to walk away now and see all that we've done go for naught. And I will talk about going for naught later on. But the point is, yes, America has made contributions, large dollar sums of contributions. But families who have lost loved ones, who've had them maimed, and their comrades in arms know the sacrifices that these men and women have made. And the one thing they implore us to do is not to see these sacrifices be made in vain. Well, we've seen a lot of negative stories, and the media has more than adequately covered those. So people are concerned about what's going on in Iraq. We ought to be concerned, but we're not hearing the stories about what is positive, about the successes of this new strategy, the Petraeus strategy. I was in Ramadi and Al Anbar 2 months ago, traveled elsewhere. I found some amazing things. The new counterinsurgency strategy, with the cooperation of the Sunni sheikhs who are now working with our military, have really essentially driven al-Qaeda out of Ramadi, and they're driving them out of the Al Anbar province. And make no mistake, Mr. President, when we heard civil war, the people over there, the Marines, the soldiers, they know they're fighting for and looking for al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is the driving force that's keeping it stirred up. And they are on the mission to search and destroy al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is there big time. But we've been hearing lots of arguments now in favor of, and they're heartfelt arguments, and people believe them. It's time for a retreat. It's time to cut back. It's time to withdraw. The cost of lives and treasure is too high. The war has not been properly managed. The war cannot be won. Mr. President, over the last several weeks, on break, when I was traveling, I had the opportunity to read Team of Rivals about Abraham Lincoln and the conduct of the Civil War. You know, over a century and a half ago, many of these same arguments were offered abundantly as reasons for President Lincoln to accept defeat in the Civil War, as are now being made for why President Bush ought to accept defeat in Iraq. As noted in historian Shelby Foote's The Civil War, A Narrative, members of Congress playing general urged the troops to abandon the cause. That great Ohio Representative Clement Vallandigham, a Copperhead Democrat, campaigned for office by calling upon soldiers to desert. He declared the South was invincible. As noted in the passages in the Civil War in the late 1862, Senate Republicans caucused, and with only a single dissenting vote, demanded that Lincoln dismiss Secretary of State Seward because they thought he was responsible for the conduct of the war. Republican leader Thurlow Weed observed that people are wild for peace. Lincoln's election is an impossibility. They were after him in full force. Now, we don't need to elaborate on the enormity of the Civil War. No, I don't need to explain what would have happened had Lincoln relented to those politically popular sentiments at the time. Lincoln chose to fight a bloody and unpopular war because he believed the enemy had to be defeated. But despite being reviled for staying the course, President Lincoln did stay the course. Unfortunately, too many of my colleagues today don't seem to be willing to see this one through. Here we are again, barely weeks into the full implementation of General Petraeus' surge, and the naysayers continue to argue for defeat. It was only a few months ago that this body, which had been calling for and looking for a new strategy, which I believe we must have, which changed the unsuccessful strategy that we had, which argued for the Baker-Hamilton report, which said, in essence, you've got to have a new strategy. You can't precipitously withdraw. We came forward, and General Petraeus drafted a counterinsurgency strategy. And that's what he told us he was going to do, supported by the surge. Now, people are want to pull the rug out from under him. He said he at least give him until September to see if this now new counterinsurgency strategy works. They are bringing in American soldiers and Marines to go in with Iraqi security forces, Iraqi army, and Iraqi police, embedded with them in command centers, barracks. They stay there. They live among the people they're protecting, and they've cleaned out the areas. They've cleaned out Ramadi, as I said. 2 months ago, 4 members of Congress walked through downtown Ramadi, which had been an Al-Qaeda command center. Al-Qaeda's been driven out. But naysayers continue to argue for defeat. Now, there may be some short-term political benefits for those calling for withdrawal. There may be there's popular sentiment for it. And some people honestly believe it. But let me quote First Lieutenant Pete Hegseth, an Iraq War veteran and director of Vets for Freedom. He stated, quote, "Iraq today is the front line of global jihad being waged against America and its allies. Both Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri have said so," close quotes. And he's correct. Our intelligence services have said so. And they have warned us. Our intelligence services warned us in January in an open intelligence hearing that if we withdrew on a political timetable, if we took our troops out without making sure that the Iraqi security forces were adequate, there would be chaos. There would be chaos, and there would be greatly increased killings among Sunni and Shia. Al-Qaeda would be able to establish a safe haven in which to launch recruitment, training, command and control, and weapons of mass destruction development. Third, the violence and chaos in Iraq would likely bring in co-religionists from other countries in the region as they went in to protect their fellow religionists. We could have a region-wide civil war, Shia versus Sunni. Now, that's what happens when we withdraw. Most of us concede there was poor management and costly mistakes made in the post-invasion phase in Iraq. But they are not compelling reasons for why we should retreat. And like all mistakes, we should learn from them and not go back and commit them again by drawing down the forces to the point where we don't have adequate troops to work with the Iraqi security forces. Washington Post columnist Michael Gerson recently pointed out those who are calling for retreat are not learning from previous mistakes, but repeating them. Gerson writes, quote, "History seems to be settling on some criticisms of the early conduct of the Iraq War, on the theory that America could liberate and leave, Force levels were reduced too early. Security responsibilities were transferred to Iraqis before they were ready, and planning for future challenges was unrealistic. And now Democrats running for president have thought deeply and produced their own Iraq policy. They want to cut force levels too early and transfer responsibilities to Iraqis before they are ready, and they offer no plan to deal with the chaos that would result 6 months down the road. In essential outline, they have chosen to duplicate the early mistakes of an administration they hold in contempt, close quotes. Well, I agree with Gerson. We should not make those mistakes. Further, and of paramount importance, we must fulfill the mission that over 3,600 brave men and women have made the ultimate sacrifice. To quote a Missouri Guardsman, Colonel Bob Leaker, who just returned from commanding the 507th Air Expeditionary Group in Iraq, quote, "I only hope that American people will give us the time. The American people must understand that this is not only about Iraq. It is a fight against Muslim fanaticism, Muslim extremists. If we pull out in the near term or at the wrong time, there will be an incredible amount of blood running throughout Iraq. And the blood and sweat that I and my brethren in arms have already given will be for naught," close quotes. Compelling words, Mr. President, and they ought to be not to be taken lightly. Not only is the security and safety of our nation and allies at stake, but so too is our credibility. Critics frequently claim that the war has damaged the United States' image and credibility throughout the world. Yet these same critics ignore what irreparable harm would be done were we to leave this mission unfilled. If you think our mission has made our image and reputation to plummet, just wait and watch it nosedive after we leave Iraq before finishing the job. Think about the millions of Iraqi citizens and leaders who have taken a stand against terrorism, who've committed to work with us to rebuild their country, to fight against the forces of radical Islamists and terrorists. What are we to say to the millions of Americans, of Iraqis who trusted Americans and believed we would stay until the mission was completed? We would regrettably see them slaughtered by terrorists as a result of our abandoning them before they were able to stand on their own. What did we say to the hundreds of thousands of South Vietnamese or millions of Cambodians who put their trust in America and were slaughtered after Congress dictated that we abandon them? History has taught us that when America abandons its commitments to spreading liberty and freedom, we are not the only ones who suffer. Rest assured, it will come back to harm us in our own homeland. Just as our intelligence community has warned us and terrorist leaders have stated, Iraq would become a base and a safe haven from which to plan and launch future attacks. Let me be clear. The enemy in Iraq consists of murderous, barbaric terrorists. They're not insurgents. They're not jihadists. Let's get some terms straight, because we fall into the trap of taking their terms. Jihad in the Muslim religion is the individual journey to moral improvement. It has been misrepresented to be a philosophy that permits and encouraging the killing of innocents, the slaughter of fellow Muslims, the slaughter of women and children. The real Arabic term for that is haraba. The people who commit it are not insurgents or jihadists. They're mufsidun. These people are condemned to live with Satan because they've committed blasphemy. And these are the people that we're fighting. It's not a civil war. They're mufsidun, the people who violate the tenets of Islam. They try to hijack it. They try to claim the Islamic banner, but they're not practicing the religion of the Prophet Muhammad. Well, there's another reason these people want to sanitize the description we use of them. Calling them insurgents implies they have the support of the local population, but the local population is being victimized, killed, evicted from their homes, or beheaded by the so-called insurgents, and that's why the Sunni sheikhs in Al-Anbar are working with us. They've seen al-Qaeda. They've lived under al-Qaeda. They want an end to the terror. That's why they're helping us identify who the terrorists are. where the weapons caches are, where the IEDs are hidden. That's why they're sending in young Sunnis to sign up. They want to be free of the terrorists. Precipitous withdrawal would be a rallying cry for these terrorists and al-Qaeda all over the world. It would be a humiliating defeat and invite further aggression and attacks from the barbarians. It would be a total loss of freedom, liberty, and peace, and a victory for totalitarianism, terrorism, and treachery. A recent pamphlet by J. Michael Waller, a scholar at the Institute of World Politics, he defined terrorism as, quote, a form of political and psychological warfare. It is protracted, high-intensity propaganda aimed more at the hearts of public and the minds of decision-makers and not at the physical victims, close quotes. By Waller's definition and by what I've heard from some people in this body, in the media, the terrorists are certainly hitting their targets. Our words should inspire our troops and the millions of Iraqi citizens who actually trust that America will not embrace defeat and leave them. Instead, the words of retreat and defeat they inspire al-Qaeda and the murderous terrorists attempting to ignite sectarian strife. Now is not the time to pull out when we're seeing encouraging signs in places where the surge has been implemented. Al-Anbar province, as I said, shows tremendous signs of progress. Even the New York Times' Michael Gordon reported last Friday how young American soldiers are executing General Petraeus' new strategy on the ground and how they're fighting and defeating al-Qaeda. One more quote, a quote from Frederick Kagan, a resident scholar at AEI, described the new strategy, quote, al-Qaeda's operations in Baghdad, its bombings, kidnappings, resupply activities, movement of foreign fighters and financing, depend on its ability to move people and goods around the rural outskirts of the capital as well as in the city. Generals Petraeus and Oderno, therefore, are conducting simultaneous operations in many places in the Baghdad belt. Fallujah, Baquba, Mahmoudia, Arab Jabbar, Salman Pak, the southern shores of Lake Thartar, Karma, Tamariyah, and so on. By attacking all these bases at once, coalition forces gravely complicate the enemy's movement from place to place. At the same time, U.S. and Iraqi forces are already disrupting al-Qaeda's major bases and are working to prevent the enemy from taking refuge. U.S. forces are aggressively targeting Shia death squads and helping Iraqi forces operating against the Shia militias, close quote. So why has this Senate chosen to debate timelines, restrictions, and retreat despite encouraging signs the surge is working? Despite the fact that this new strategy has only been in place fully for barely a month, and despite the fact that those who want to withdraw or retreat have failed to offer any constructive alternatives or how they would deal with the chaos that would ensue from their retreat. It is a huge disappointment that this debate is not about how we can achieve victory, but how quickly can we cede defeat. This has become a political debate, and the focus of our national security has been sidetracked. We should not pass legislation that provides our enemy a clear path to victory, a victory which, sadly, many in this body are ready to award al-Qaeda without ever having given the surge a fighting chance. And the surge is, indeed, the best hope we have for establishing the safety and stability in the area, which will allow the Iraqi security forces to take over and give the Iraqi government the space to develop a workable government that can rule their country. Mr. President, I thank the chair and yield the floor.